Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about tax records. Now that may not seem very exciting to some of you, but it is a goldmine of genealogy information. So today I'll talk about why you would want to use tax records, what information you're going to find in them, where you can find them, and then a little bit about how to use them. It just sometimes overwhelms me a little bit that there are just so many records available to us for genealogy, and so very little time sometimes to work on our own family history. But I had a lot of fun putting this together, and hopefully this will just open your mind to a new possibility for records and ways in which you can use them. Let's go ahead and dive in to our discussion about tax records. So first, let's talk about why we would want to use them. Sometimes understanding that helps us know what we're getting ourselves into a little bit. First of all, they often predate census records. So for most of us here in the United States, we know that the census, the U.S. federal census, began in 1790. The most currently available census, of course, is the 1940 census due to privacy laws. So the tax records a lot of times are available for earlier than 1790. They go back into the 1770s, 1780s, and so it gives us that view. They also fill in the gaps in between censuses. So the census, of course, here in the United States is taken every 10 years. On the 10s, and what that means is that we've got a 10-year gap every time where we might not know if our family moved or if somebody passed away or if there were changes in that family structure. And so tax records help us fill in some of those gaps. Also, of course, there is the giant gap because of the missing 1890 census. For those of you who are not aware, the 1890 census was, of course, destroyed in a fire and water damage, or smoke and water damage, and then it was mostly destroyed. And so now, instead of a 10-year gap, we have this 20-year gap between the 1880 census and the 1900 census. So tax records are a really good way to fill in that gap. Most men were taxed first when they were 21 years old. So besides just giving us information about who lived where and what was taxed, it also helps us kind of narrow in on ages. If you see a man in the tax records, and then all of a sudden one year, there is another man with the same name who shows up right next to him, it's very likely that that is a son that aged into being taxable. And so even for for censuses before 1850, only listed head of household. But very often you end up with multi-generational households pre-1850. And so this will help you identify additional people in the family. So you'll see any sons that are still living there or that stay in the community, and you can kind of track them using those tax records. And then finally, and this is always a little bit amusing to me, I have found that tax records are very, very, very complete. The tax man is going to find your ancestor, and he's a lot more motivated to do that than possibly a census enumerator. So where on occasion people were missed in the census, you're very rarely going to find that they were missed in tax records, and certainly not multiple years in a row. So this is an excellent source of really complete records where they exist. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about what information you're going to find on them. They don't feel like they have a lot of genealogical detail or value until you start looking at them a little bit in context. So first of all, it just has the names of taxable men. Of course, there are women included where they are property owners, and property laws, of course, differ throughout time and by location. So if a woman owned property that was taxable, then of course she will show up on those as well. But men often are going to show up no matter what, just as either as a poll tax, kind of like an income tax, any kind of property that the family owns. And we're not just talking, when I say property, I'm not just talking about land. A cow was considered property, and very, very most families owned at least a cow, even if they didn't own the land that they lived on and farmed. And so they'll be included in these tax records if they have any property at all. Not only are they going to be showing up on the list because they own property, but in some cases that personal property is going to be inventoried. It will tell you exactly, how large their house is, how many animals of each kind they own, what the makeup is of their livestock. Sometimes it lists details down to, the number of feather beds they have and the kind of dishes that they use. I mean, sometimes you get really detailed personal property inventories in these tax lists. Sometimes they're a little bit more vague. They're also, these tax records are organized by location. So much like a census, the primary piece of evidence you're discovering is where they are living and who's living around them. That's something that I hope that you're getting into the habit of doing. And if you're not, I would strongly encourage it. When you're looking at a census record, the actual image of the census, and the same with tax records, make sure that you're looking for other family members, that you're looking for other people in the same area with the same last name. Those often are the clues that you need to start to tie families together. Very frequently I get questions, particularly as we get back into the early 1800s and the late 1700s, how do I know who this person's parents are? Well, have you looked for everybody of that same surname living in the same county? And can you figure out if they have a child who should be about that right age? Really useful tax records are really useful for the same exercise, to start to become familiar with others with the same surname. Also pay really close attention to those neighbors. People married people they knew. That sounds silly to say it out loud, but it's true. Like, they married who they associated with. They weren't, going online to some dating website and finding a spouse or writing away for a spouse. They married the people that they worked with and that they associated with and that they worshiped with. They married people that, their cousins knew in the next town over. So pay attention to those neighbors. Very often what you're going to discover are families that move from one location to another together. Often those are the families that worship together or work together. And very often those young men are going to marry those same young women. So you'll start to get clues to possible maiden names for some of the women in your tree. So always pay attention to that on any record, but particularly census and tax records. And then I kind of skipped this one down just to the bottom a little bit. Sometimes an occupation is listed on a tax record. I've seen it a few times. More often what you're going to see is if people have what's called a taxable profession, meaning they're merchants or they own a lot of inventory for some kind of a business, or if they have a large number of employees or any number of employees. There's some different tax structures sometimes, just like today, based on that. And so there are sometimes clues there to the kind of occupation that your ancestor may have engaged in, and based on if it was a taxable profession and they had employees, you get some insights into the success of their business or not. Okay, next we are going to talk about where to find these tax records. So first of all, you're going to need to go into search and click on card catalog. So if I go onto the website here, and let me just make this a little bit bigger so that you can see it, I'm going to hover over search. And card catalog, of course, is going to be the very bottom option there. I'm going to click on that. Now, if I make this screen a little bit bigger, I could use some of my filters over here. There's a lot of different ways to get to the tax records. As a matter of fact, if you were just to do a general search for your ancestor, you would probably come up with these eventually. But the card catalog for me is just a really focused way to get to a specific database that I'm looking for. So I'm going to come in here to the card catalog, and in the title field, I'm just going to type in the word tax and click search. What you're going to see here is that Ancestry.com has 48 databases that contain tax lists, tax rolls, tax digests, tax records of some sort. You'll notice that they are for all over the U.S., and we also have, looks like here, about 1.2 million tax records for the UK as well for 1798. You'll notice here this top list is for the IRS. So it's IRS tax assessment lists, dates back to 1862, goes through 1918. The rest of these mostly are going to be organized either by state. So we see we see here we have Georgia, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, or they're going to be organized by county. So Bucks County, Savannah County, Caswell County, Dorset, England, right? So you're going to see tax records, one major database for the whole country, and then mostly they're going to be state or county level tax records. That's just the way that the records are organized. So you're going to go to search in the card catalog. You're going to put tax in the title field and click search. That will show you which tax records exist, and then you can further filter those based on the location or the time period. Now, let's talk a little bit about how to use these tax records, because this is kind of the meat of the thing, right? One of the suggestions that I give, and it becomes more emphatic the more time I spend in family history, is to always read the database description first. This lets you know a few things. First of all, it lets you know what you're getting into. Second of all, it lets you know what exists in that database. And then third, it lets you know exactly how the database is arranged, maybe some of the quirks or some of the specifics about what was indexed, what's included. And then finally, there is always source information. So you know where Ancestry.com obtained these records, because sometimes there's more, and that more is going to be held by that archive or that state library, and that enables you to know where to go or who to contact in order to see if there is more information about your ancestors in that location. So when I say always read the database description first, let me just pull up a few of these databases so that we can look at them here. Okay, let's go to Pennsylvania as an example. When you get to the database itself, so all I did was just clicked on whichever one of these databases I wanted to look at. When you get to the database, of course, you're going to have the search box right there in front in your face. Scroll down past that search box, and here's where you're going to see the source information. So in this case, this particular set of Pennsylvania tax records came to Ancestry.com from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So that's where we obtained this information from. So if you wanted to see if you find your ancestor in this collection and you want to see if there are more records that they hold about your ancestor, you could just Google this location here and contact them to see what other kinds of records they might hold. Now, scroll down past that source information, and that's where you're going to see the database description. Now, here's an interesting thing or an important thing about this particular database, and this is where you're going to find it. We have listed the counties that are included in this set of tax records, and you'll notice here this is not every county in the state of Pennsylvania. It's pretty great coverage over some pretty well-populated counties, but it is not every single county in the state. So if you had just come in here and started searching and you were looking for somebody in a county that didn't exist on our list, you might, if you had not read the database description, assume, well, my ancestor wasn't really living there, or it's been indexed wrong, or you might get frustrated because you can't find it. Had you read the database description first, you would have known, oh, the county I'm specifically interested in is not included. So pay attention to that kind of information. Also, there's this little blurb up here about what kinds of taxes there were. So at different times throughout history, there were different kinds of taxes levied against different things. So for example, liquor taxes, this one I love, carriage and billiard table taxes. So if you had a billiard table, you were taxed, or a carriage or multiple carriages, right? I've seen things like window taxes and fireplace taxes. It's just different ways that the government determines, and it could be federal, local, whatever, government determines to tax different property at different times. And so there's a little bit of information there about that. Then if you scroll down here, it lists what you might find in these records. So you'll see a list of information that is going to be included in these particular records. Okay, so that's the database description. Again, anytime you get to a database, scroll down past the search box, you'll see the source information, and then you'll see a database description that includes the information that we have about that particular database, what's included, where it's from, and what limitations there might be on that particular set of records. So always read the database description first. Now, the next step you're going to want to do then, of course, is search. I would encourage you, just put in a name and see what happens. Sometimes that's the most useful way to become familiar with a set of records. So for example, if I'm here in these, let's use these IRS records here. If I'm here in these IRS records, I'm going to go ahead and just type in Shipman and just see what comes up, right? It's just a surname. And I did mark it exact, and there are 903 of them. So that gives me a feeling for what I'm getting into. Then I might narrow my search a little bit more. So specifically, I'm interested in Shipmans who might be living in Texas. Again, I just put in a name of a state, but I did mark that exact. I'm going to go ahead and click search then, and I only come up with one. That's instructive information for me in this particular set of records. So that's kind of how it's what we call search iteration, right? I kind of iterate on my searches sometimes, and I can do that when I'm in a specific database a lot easier than I can do that when I'm doing what we call a global search, where I'm searching all 11 billion records on Ancestry.com. So it just kind of gives me a feel for what records might exist in that location for my person. I can do the same thing over here on this Georgia set of records. I can come in here and I know I've got a lot of Lawrence family that's from Georgia. Well, yeah, so there's 1,281 of them, or 1,281 instances that show up. Now, if I'm interested in a specific Lawrence, I could then maybe drop in a first name and see what comes up. Now, what you're going to notice here, there's 18 of them, but I'm going to guess that these first 6 or 8 are all for the same person. You'll notice they're all in the same county, and they are 1 year right after the other. And so, maybe this is the same person. You'll notice there's a couple here where it's the same year. So here's a Henry Lawrence in Pike County. There's 2 for 1834 and 3 for 1835. That immediately, even without looking at the record itself, helps me know that maybe there are multiple men living in that county with the same name. And that's an important thing to start to become familiar with, because it's very easy sometimes to just attach to a specific person that we find in a record because they have the right name and they're the right age and they're living in the right place. But sometimes, as a matter of fact, often, even with unusual names, you will find that there are multiple men living in the same time and place. Sometimes they're cousins, first cousins, both named after a grandfather. And so tax records just kind of help you start to see some of those patterns about where you might have multiple men with the same name. And again, that's just looking at the index. I haven't even looked at an actual record yet. So do a search by name, then do a search maybe by surname and location, particularly in those federal records. That helped me kind of narrow it down. If I look at these Pennsylvania records, this is kind of an interesting exercise. So I just put in the last name of Lott. Shows me 104 of them. Well, then I was specifically interested in someone named Abraham Lott, and now I've got 7 of them. Again, they're in sequential order, so they're all in the same county, and I've just got, year after year after year here. That's great. That's excellent information. You'll notice, again, these are 1700s records, so they predate census records. But then maybe I want to see who else might be living in that same location. So I'm just going to come down here and put that location in that keyword field, and now I've got 11 search results. So let me just show you what we're looking at here, because this was really interesting to me. I had searched for Abraham Lott, but I had done it exactly. And that meant that I missed this Abram, and I missed this abbreviation of his name, ABRM, and this abbreviation of his name, ABM. And then right here, smack dab in the middle of all of these Abraham Lotts, I have a Zephaniah Lott who shows up. Now, what that tells me is there's a possibility here that Abram has a son named Zephaniah who in 1783, or between 1782 and 1783 tax lists, turned 21. You'll notice then he doesn't show up again. So maybe he turned 21 and then moved away. So those are the kinds of clues that I'm looking for in tax lists, that kind of information that I can search for and see show up and see people appear and disappear. Why is Abram not showing up before 1779? Well, I need to check and see if there are tax lists for Bucks County before 1779 included in this database. If they are, and he doesn't show up until 1779, that might tell me a couple of things. Either he had just turned 21, or he had moved there from somewhere else. If I scroll down here to the bottom of my search results list, you'll see the last time he shows up is in 1789. So again, is that because he's there for 10 years? Is that because Bucks County records only go up through 1789? So I could do a search for Bucks County, no name, and see if there are records after 1789 that show up in my search results. Is it because Abram moved away? Do I need to look for him in a different county or a different state after 1789? Or is it possible that 1789 is the year he died? And so that's why he doesn't show up then on the 1790 tax lists. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. That's how I use just the indexes of the tax lists to start to look for some of those patterns by name and by location, and it really works fantastic. Now, let me give you a few bonus tips when you're looking at a book, and let me show you. I haven't even shown you an actual image yet. Let's look at a couple of those. Let's pick up this 1834 tax list for Henry Lawrence in Georgia. These tax lists are gorgeous records. I just love them. Okay, so here is a tax list. And if you'll look, here's Henry Lawrence. And in Georgia in particular, they actually divide the state into what we call militia districts. And so this is Captain Pryor's district, Captain Pryor being the head of the militia for that particular district. Now, you'll see here there's these little headings. There's this tiny little word up here that says lands, and then pull with some headings and some information. Sometimes you don't know what that means, and sometimes that means that you need to go to the beginning of the book to figure that out. So when you're looking here at a book, you look down here and there's the image numbers. Now I'm on page 96 of 150. I can just change that number there to 1 and hit enter, and that will jump me back to the first page of the book, right? And you can see here, if I zoom out just a little bit, this is Tax Digests for 1834 for Pike County, Georgia. And then I can go page by page through this book to see if there are any clues to some of this information. It also helps me understand a little bit more about how this is organized. So I can see here, these are actually 2-page documents, right? So it was actually it went all the way across both pages of the book, but we filmed them, or they've been microfilmed or digitized, one image at a time. So here's the name and some information about the land, and then on this second page is the information actually about the district, some numbers, some financial information, of course, because these are tax records. My guess is this is the tax information. Now, in this case, there's not really any more detailed information. So I might have to do some Googling to understand about militia districts or tax laws in Georgia in that particular year, so that I understand a little bit more about what I'm looking for. Or I might want to just look here for some notations. So for example, here, and I don't know if you can read this, but it says money on interest, $41, right? Start looking for the kinds of things that are being taxed in the community. 1 2-wheel carriage, right? Lots of little notations that are going to show up that are going to help you understand what's going on in the area. Also, look for other people with the same name. I mentioned that earlier. In this case, as I get to image number 8, I'm going to see that there is a Zachariah Lawrence. Start to collect some of that information, because chances are many of those people are going to be related if they're living in the same location in some of these more remote areas, in particular back in the early 1800s or late 1700s. So very often I'll just jump back to the beginning of the book and start to look through for any clues just about the community, about how it's organized, also about how the records themselves are organized, so that when I'm looking at the page for my person, I understand it a little bit better. and do that same thing with any one of these books, and they're all going to look a little bit different because the way, it's not like a U.S. federal census where the records are all the same and they all look the same. You're going to see here different kinds of forms because every county or every state may have managed it a little bit differently. Now, this Pennsylvania record I particularly love just because it gives some really detailed information here. There's a column here for cattle, so you can just skim down here and see how many cattle each person owned. Here's a carriage of steel listed. Here's just a carriage, and then we get here to my Abraham lot, and there's some information here and the notation about the taxes that he owed. So excellent records that I just love using, but sometimes you need to jump back to the beginning of that book and just take a look at how they're organized. Sometimes, just be aware, there are 2 copies. So if I look at this particular list here, right, tell me what you think might be a little unusual about this. I'm looking at this: Atkinson, Allen, Beeforth, Broom, Buckley, right, Church, Clark. They're alphabetical. Well, is there a section that is not alphabetical? Sometimes they do two notations. So if I were to go through this book page by page, what I might discover is that there is a section that's alphabetical and then a section that was done in the order of the residents. So those are the kinds of things that you're looking for. There might also be a notation about who is exempt from taxes. That helps you understand if your ancestor is missing, why they might be missing. You're looking for maybe information or description about those column headings, and then check to see, is it in alphabetical order or is it in visitation order, and do both exist in the book? Those are the kinds of things that you're looking for. That is all I have prepared for you today. I hope that this was helpful information. I would encourage you just to go spend some time doing some searches, looking at some of those records, becoming a little bit more familiar with them. You will find that they will just really fill in some of the holes in between censuses and also give you some more detail about your ancestors' lives prior to 1850, when every member of the household was listed on a census, and certainly prior to 1790, when the U.S. federal census started being enumerated. The one final note, when I put this up on YouTube, I will link to an article that you can read. It's a blog over at archives.com, just about more information about tax records. As always, if you have questions and are watching this live, I will be on chat in just a few minutes to answer any of those questions. And if you're watching an archived version of this on our YouTube channel, please feel free to leave a comment. I do monitor those and will answer as appropriate. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.